episode of Oregon Life.
Thanks for
right?
watching this episode
of Oregon Life.
Hello, I'm Frank Caruso, producer of Oregon Life, and we're ending the year out with a two-part episode. We meet Adam Pankratz. He takes a journey. He's at the UW-Madison studying zoology. He goes to Chicago, works for the Lincoln Park Zoo, taking care of the animals. But little did he know that those animals would become the focal point of his journey. Interviewing him, I became immersed in his work, and he is just a wonderful, talented artist. And as always, we are thankful to produce this episode through the generous contributions of Tor Horse Insurance. Tor Horse Insurance is more than a sponsor of Oregon Life. Tor Horse, like OCAmedia, has celebrated our community for over 45 years, fulfilling their insurance needs. Through their generous contributions, Tor Horse Insurance has been a wonderful partner to OCAmedia, making it possible for us to produce episodes like Greenhaven Gardens, Keene Garlic, and highlighting the best of Oregon and surrounding areas. And that includes this episode.
Hi, my name is Adam Pankratz. I am an artist, a painter working with acrylics, and I work primarily with wildlife. I started painting when I was 30 years old. I'm self-taught, never took any courses in high school or college, but became so gripped by it that my own studies in it have been vigorous, and my passion for it has kind of grown. Before I was painting, I was a zookeeper at the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. While I was there, I worked with most of the collection, but I was primarily based in the small mammal and reptile house. So a lot of my work features reptiles. I really enjoy working with all the scales and different textures on lizards and snakes, and there's just so much potential in those animals to kind of highlight their interesting features for people that maybe don't necessarily want to look too closely at reptiles. But I also love to paint birds. Similarly, the same can be said for birds, that there's a lot going on when you look closely. I've always been very passionate about wildlife since I was a little kid. My mom said that she could tell when I was 2 years old that, what I would want to play with, and if there's an animal toy nearby, that's the one I was going to pick up. And so I had a lot of experiences as a kid that brought me close to nature, and in those experiences, the excitement of encountering something, a red-tailed hawk or a pine snake or a painted turtle, something, being close to that animal, like experiencing it, there's some kind of emotional charge that I and many other people experience. And I feel that the best way to kind of deliver that in the form of painting is to really focus on the facial details, because we as humans, that's how we connect with other people, is reading facial expressions and body language. And there's a lot that can be brought out in a painting of an animal that a person maybe wouldn't notice, because we don't have many opportunities to be really close with wildlife. And I insist that being a zookeeper was a necessary step for me before taking this on. And I never knew I was going to do this when I was working at the zoo. I kind of thought that would be my career. And my wife and I decided we wanted to raise a family in Madison. I enjoyed working at the zoo. There were things that I didn't enjoy about working at the zoo, and I was ready for a transition in my life. While I was in Chicago, the musical Hamilton became a phenomenon. And interesting little sidebar, while I was there was a baby camel that was born. And as a joke, I emailed, half serious, I emailed my supervisor, and I said, we should name this baby camel Alexander Camilton. And my supervisor, not having a strong sense of humor, I figured it would end there. But he thought it was just funny enough to forward to his boss, and she forwarded it to her boss, and somehow it made its way up the chain to the top of the zoo, and they made a choice that was very out of character for them, and they went with it. And this little camel was a internet and real world sensation. He brought in visitors from all over the world. And Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator of Hamilton himself, tweeted a camel. He retweeted the story with a camel emoji. And for me to have been anonymously behind that, that was a really exciting thing. And it kind of planted a seed in my mind, like what one little idea can do, like the kind of influence it can have and reach it can have. And Hamilton, like the power and the beauty of that musical, really inspired me and a friend of mine who was a writer to re-examine our own creative potentials. I started out with drawing because something about painting and the lack of total control that you have, like when you put a pencil to paper, you more or less know what that line's going to look like based on how you move your hand. With painting, the multitude of brush types that are available to you, the multitude of paint products and the way that they interact with brushes, with canvas, there is a little more opportunity for the unexpected to happen. And it took time for me to kind of grasp this and integrate it into myself as somebody that was learning to let go of control in my external life that was running in parallel with my creative work. And I actually first started painting. My friends and I here in Madison, when we moved from Chicago, we decided to set up an evening where we bought a couple canvases, bought some paints, and a couple bottles of wine, like you can do at a wine bar where they set up these painting nights. And we decided to recreate that for ourselves. And I painted a very zoomed in face of a little bird called an arasari, which is like a miniature toucan. And it was not very good, but I loved working with liquid colors so much that from that moment, I said, this is something that I can work with, that I can grow with, that I can really learn to love. And I just took off. From there, I started a series of primate portraits in different size canvases that were roughly proportional to the species. And I covered this entire wall here with 50 primate faces. Anything from a gorilla piece that was like this big to like a pygmy marmoset that was this big. So I had pieces that were 2 inches by 2 inches, and I had pieces that were like 18 by 24, and everything in between. And that was a lot of fun. And from there, it has just kind of taken me to places that that's the beautiful thing about the creative process, is you can't necessarily see forward as to where it's going to take you. Things are going to unfold that you didn't expect. So I've always been fascinated with snakes ever since I was a little kid. My mom says I never showed any fear or hesitation. I remember when I was little, I was maybe 5 years old, my parents took me to a teachers convention. I think it was in Milwaukee or Madison. And there was somebody there that was walking around with a big snake on their shoulders. And I, as a 5-year-old, demanded that they let me hold that snake and wouldn't give up until they did. And so it's always been an animal that's held my fascination. I've had a couple of snake pets over the years. I have a few now. This one is a ball python. Her name is Banshee. And I mentioned earlier that they end up becoming a zookeeper. I studied zoology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with the intention of becoming a high school biology teacher. I sort of stumbled into becoming a zookeeper by accident and loved it. I worked at first as a roving keeper, working in in multiple buildings throughout the zoo, kind of helping out as needed. But I eventually landed a permanent position in the small mammal and reptile house because of my knowledge and experience with snakes. And while I was there, I worked with about a dozen species of snakes, including some venomous. I've handled rattlesnakes, I've handled vipers, and snakes are just really incredible. And I think a lot of the fear in society around snakes comes from a lack of understanding. And a couple of interesting things about this snake here. Pythons have labial pits on their snout that allow them to detect heat. It's sort of a sixth sense that they have. They can detect if a rodent is moving past them or a few feet away. They can detect the body heat given off by that animal. Snakes are also completely deaf. They do have an organ that allows them to detect vibrations, so they can feel if something is walking nearby. They have very poor eyesight, and they rely almost entirely on a very strong sense of smell. Another interesting tidbit, when you see videos or pictures of snake charmers working with cobras and they kiss it on top of the head, the reason they're able to do that, it's not because they have some sort of magic power over the snake, it's that snakes cannot strike upwards. So if you approach it from above, there's nothing the snake's going to be able to do if you're approaching it the right way. Tune in next week for part 2 of Oregon Life.
Watching this episode of Oregon Life.
Thanks for
Right?
watching this
Episode of Oregon Life.